What's up YouTube, it's the one and only Legend of Winning, aka Low, and I am back again with another video. Now over the course of the last 15 to 16 years, a lot of mistakes have been made in the offseason. Everything from trades to draft picks to unfortunately signing some of the craziest contracts in NBA history has occurred, and I think it's time to kind of recollect on the things that have happened within this time period. Now in this video right here, I will specifically be talking about trades and signings that have happened since the year 2000. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a thumbs up. Also, if you want to leave a comment if I miss a trade or I miss a signing in the offseason the last 15 years, please let me know in that comment section below. And also, please don't forget, never forget to subscribe to the channel for all updates on the rest of the offseason, because there's a lot of things that I'm going to be doing in the month of October. But without further ado, let's get right into it. Here are the 4 worst off-season moves since the year 2000. First, we're going to start off with the 2013 Brooklyn Nets and Boston Celtics trade. Even though this trade happened in 2013, it's going to be affecting the NBA all the way into 2018 because Brooklyn is just ridiculous with how they give away their draft picks. See, back in 2013, the Brooklyn Nets had just relocated out of New Jersey, and they needed some star power to convince a lot more people to be involved with the new franchise. Up until this moment, they have been trying to convince everybody from LeBron James to Jay-Z to be a part of the new organization. Unfortunately, they failed with LeBron James, so they were consistently looking for that star power that they desperately needed. And lo and behold, the Boston Celtics had all the star power in the world for the Brooklyn Nets. In the 2013 offseason, Brooklyn acquired Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry. And on the other hand, the Boston Celtics acquired Chris Humphries, Gerald Wallace, Chris Joseph, Marshawn Brooks, Keith Bogans, and here's where the real value shows. 2014 first round pick, 2016 first round pick, 2018 first round pick, and they had the rights to swap for the 2017 first round pick. With this trade, Boston literally acquired 4 out of the next 5 draft picks from Brooklyn. But before we actually go into the draft picks and the actual value that each pick has, let's talk about the actual players that Brooklyn acquired. Because like I stated earlier, Brooklyn was really looking for that star power. They were looking for that player or players that was really going to push them over the top. If they would have picked some of these players 5, 6, maybe 10 years ago, then maybe that would make sense for them to give up so many draft assets. Unfortunately, they did it, and they ended up acquiring a Paul Pierce that was 35 years old, and Kevin Garnett and Jason Terry, who are both 36 as well. To make matters even worse, Paul Pierce was on an expiring contract, and Jason Terry and Kevin Garnett only had 2 years left on theirs. So they literally gave up assets that were 5 years in advance with the draft picks for players that were only contractually obligated to stay on the team for no more than 2 years. And speaking on the draft picks, let's talk about the potential talents that they could have actually drafted from these picks. In 2014, with the 17th pick, you still had players such as PJ Harrison, Gary Harris, and Kyle Anderson still on the board, but by far the best player that was still available was Rodney Hood. And then in 2016, the third pick went to the Boston Celtics, even though it should have been to the Brooklyn Nets. And of course, at that point, you can literally pick anybody you want, from Jaylen Brown, Dragon Bender, Buddy Hield. But because the Brooklyn Nets suffer so much at that point guard position, it would only make sense for them to draft Chris Dunn. With a team that consistently finds himself at the bottom of the barrel each and every year in the Eastern Conference without draft picks, next up, we have the curious case of Joe Smith and the Minnesota Timberwolves in the 2000 offseason. Now, for those who aren't familiar with what happened with Joe Smith and the Minnesota Timberwolves, let me give you a quick backstory. See, Joe Smith was a young upcoming player that played for the Golden State Warriors in the mid to late 90s and actually got drafted by them in 1995, and in his rookie year, he posted up 15 points and nearly 9 rebounds. He continued to have that success within his time with the Golden State Warriors and actually became a very prominent young player in the NBA and highly sought after once he became a free agent. However, Joe Smith and a lot of other players in the 1999 offseason ended up seeing a lot of C's in money and contracts because of the lockout that was happening in 1998. The lockout lasted for a very long time and actually cut the 98-99 season so short that there were only 50 games being played that year. So as a player who was a free agent in the 99 lockout, it was pretty hard to find a contract. But not for Joe Smith, because that's how great of a player a lot of people expected him to be. He was receiving multi-million-dollar contracts throughout this process, and crazy enough, he turned all of that down to sign a one-year, $1.75 million contract to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, obviously, this raised some eyebrows, but a lot of people just chalked it up to the fact that there was a lockout season, and if Joe Smith really wanted to play for Minnesota, then he was going to, but he was going to sign a bigger contract once the shortened season was over. So later on that year, after the offseason had transpired, Joe Smith was met again with a whole bunch of other contracts, including a $80 million contract from the Golden State Warriors, which he declined and signed back to the Minnesota Timberwolves for a one-year, $2.1 million contract. Now, at this point, you don't really have to be a rocket science or Albert Einstein to figure out something is going on. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Why would he consistently turn down million-dollar contracts to sign 2 one-year deals for the Minnesota Timberwolves? Well, come to find out that Joe Smith and the Timberwolves had a under-the-table deal. See, Joe Smith would sign 3 one-year deal contracts for very little money, allowing the Timberwolves to acquire his bird rights. Of course, once you have a player's bird rights, you are now allowed to go over the salary cap when you want to re-sign them. And of course, for his loyalty, he was going to be receiving a $86 million contract for his 3 one-year deal contracts that he initially signed for the Timberwolves. Now, for people who don't know this, what I just said was illegal. You cannot give players future financial incentives to sign contracts. Now, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. But see, David Stern was not going to be fooled 3 times. And everything came crashing down in the 2000 offseason when Joe Smith was about to sign his last one-year deal. First thing first, he fined the team $3.5 million. Second thing he did was make sure that the contract that Joe Smith was going to sign was going to be void, and also the progress to getting his bird rights to the team was also voided as well. Also, the owner of the Timberwolves at the time, Glenn Taylor, was suspended, and just coincidentally, Kevin McHale, who was the vice president of basketball operations for the Timberwolves at the time, just so happened to step down, claiming that he had no idea what was going on. But by far the biggest consequence that the Timberwolves had to face was the fact that they were about to lose 3 first-round draft picks. The 2001 draft pick, 2002 draft pick, and the 2004 first-round draft pick. First, let's look at the 2001 draft. The Minnesota Timberwolves finished 8th in the conference with a record of 47-35, which would have given them the 18th pick in the draft, which means that they had the opportunity to sign players such as Zach Randolph, Gerald Wallace, Samuel Dalembert, but since the Timberwolves needed a point guard at the time, let's give them Tony Parker. The next draft after that, after the 2001-2002 season, the Minnesota Timberwolves finished 50-32, which ended up giving them the 5th seed in the Western Conference, which means they would have had the 23rd pick. And right at that pick, the Detroit Pistons initially picked Tayshaun Prince, but hey, if they had that pick, they also would have been able to get Tayshaun Prince themselves. And finally, in the 2003-2004 season, they finished 58-24, which was the 1st seed in the Western Conference and the 2nd best record in the NBA. So at this point, they probably don't have too much of a great pick. I mean, all the best players are already picked, especially since you're going to have the 2nd to last pick in the draft. However, Anderson Varejao was the 1st pick in the 2nd round, so I'm pretty sure that would help them out as well. And on top of that, to add little sprinkles on this terrible ice cream that the Minnesota Timberwolves had to end up eating for the next 3 to 4 years, Joe Smith, the player that they risked all this for, ended up being a journeyman, a player that literally played for 12 other teams within his time in the NBA. Just ridiculous. He never panned out to be the great player that a lot of people expected him to be, and the fact that, again, the Minnesota Timberwolves spent all this time and effort in doing illegal deeds to acquire him is just mind-blowing to say the least. Next up, we have by far one of the craziest contracts that have ever been signed in the past 15 years with the 6-year, $111 million contract that Gilbert Arenas signed with the Washington Wizards. But to make matters even worse, this right here is a combo deal. This deal was so bad that it actually spilled over into the Orlando Magic's hands later on in the 2000s, and we're going to be talking about that as well because it just got even worse and a bigger mess once Orlando picked up Gilbert Arenas. But first, for those who don't know who Gilbert Arenas is, Gilbert Arenas was a combo guard that played in the early to mid 2000s for the Washington Wizards and the Golden State Warriors. Of course, a lot of us know Gilbert Arenas for his time with Washington, especially in the 2004-2005 season, where he received his first All-Star selection, his Most Improved Player award, and by far putting up some of the craziest numbers and some of the craziest highlights the NBA had seen at that point in time. Posted numbers such as 28 points, 4 to 5 rebounds, and 6 assists. So at this point in Gilbert Arenas' career, along with the Washington Wizards, they were really ready to lock him down. And in the 2007-2008 season, he was an expiring contract, so they were really prepared to throw a large amount of money at Gilbert Arenas. However, Gilbert Arenas suffered from a major knee injury that forced him to only play 13 games in the 2007-2008 season. Now at this point, you could probably understand why this is such a big deal for Gilbert Arenas and for the rest of the league for that matter. Not only was Gilbert Arenas a star-studded player at this point in his career, but he was also expecting a boatload of money when he became a free agent simply because of the work ethic and the time that he put in the gym that resulted in the crazy numbers that he posted up. But unfortunately, as a free agent or a upcoming free agent, the last thing you want to do on your last year on your contract is to be nursing an injury on the sideline. So waters started to become a tad bit shaky for Gilbert Arenas, but don't you dare worry, Mr. Arenas. The Washington Wizards, they have your back. Even though he only played 13 games in the 2008 season, they still threw a 6-year, $111 million contract at Gilbert Arenas. With no hesitation, obviously Gilbert Arenas signed the contract because it was basically max money at the time, and Gilbert Arenas and the Washington Wizards had came to an agreement to sign the contract, which basically landed Gilbert Arenas as the face of the franchise. Unfortunately for the Washington Wizards though, the nagging knee injuries just didn't stop. At this point in Gilbert Arenas' career, it was obvious that he was never going to be able to reach the same peak that he once had a few years prior, and Washington was willing to move on, especially after picking up John Wall in the NBA draft. However, it was hard to move Gilbert Arenas since he was only 2 years in his 6-year, $111 million contract. So the Washington Wizards had to find some sucker team to trade away Gilbert Arenas. And sure enough, the Orlando Magic was right around the corner. In the 2010 season, Gilbert Arenas ended up on the Orlando Magic after the trade amongst the Washington Wizards and the Orlando Magic that ended up with Richard Lewis sending over to Washington. Not only did they acquire him, but within a year of him being on the team, they ended up amnestying his contract. At this point in time, it was December 2011, and Gilbert Arenas was still owed $62 million within a 3-year time frame. But since they amnestied him and were able to stretch him out, even though Gilbert Arenas last time he played on the court for the Orlando Magic was 2011, they stretched it out all the way to 2016, which means that yes, people, this last offseason that just passed was the last time that Gilbert Arenas got paid by the Orlando Magic from a contract that he signed nearly 10 years ago. It's crazy to say the least. Orlando literally had to stretch his contract 2 to 3 more years because the amount of money that he was owed at that point in time. And finally, people, we have the James Harden to the Houston Rockets trade that happened in the offseason of 2012. Now, obviously, this is by far one of the most criticized transactions in NBA history, let alone in the last 15 years. But before we get into the actual trade and the details, let's talk about who James Harden was before this transaction transpired. First and foremost, James Harden was drafted in the 2009 draft with the OKC Thunder with the number 3 pick. Later on in his career, he found himself producing really solid numbers coming off the bench for the Thunder, and actually in the 2011-2012 season, he ended up winning the Sixth Man of the Year award. In that same season, OKC found themselves in the NBA Finals going up against the Miami Heat, but unfortunately they did ended up coming short to Miami. However, a lot of people found a lot of positivity in the loss, especially since the team was so young. A lot of people came to the conclusion that this will be a team that a lot of people will fear in years to come. You had players like Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, and Serge Ibaka, players who weren't even 26 yet. But the tone on OKC completely changed later on in the offseason. On October 27th, 2012, OKC and Houston came to a conclusion on a trade that ended up sending James Harden, Cole Aldridge, Daquan Cook, Lazar Hayward to Houston, and in return they were going to receive Jeremy Lamb, Kevin Martin, and 2 first-round picks that ended up being Steven Adams and Mitch McGrary. Now, obviously, hindsight is 2020, so we all know how terrible of a trade this was. James Harden went on to play for the Houston Rockets and ended up putting up not only great numbers, but MVP level numbers, consistently scoring over 25 points, consistently giving the Houston Rockets 6 or 7 assists, and consistently pushing a team to the playoffs and being the face of the franchise. The fact that OKC had that on their bench is ridiculous to say the least. And the reason why this has to be one of the worst trades in NBA history is simply due to the fact that OKC was on the brink of being by far one of the best teams, again, not only in its time, but of all time. When you have that much young talent on your team, by any means necessary, you want to keep everybody there. And unfortunately, they just weren't able to do so. So because of that, they find themselves on the top of my list. So there you have it, people. Those are the 4 worst transactions in the offseason since the year 2000. And again, like I said, that James Harden trade might arguably be one of the worst trades in NBA history. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a thumbs up. Also, if you feel like if I missed a transaction, a trade, or a signing, please leave a comment in the comment section below. And as always, please sub to the channel. It helps me out a lot. And you also will be updated on all the content that I will be releasing in the month of October to prepare us all for the NBA season. And with that being said, I will see y'all later. Peace.